So welcome everyone to this Creative Spark webinar. And today we have Dr. Fiona Whitehurst and Paul Richter joining us to talk about their virtual, I'm sure I'm going to get it wrong, Createathon. Before we're going to get started, I would just love to repeat the quick housekeeping rules, just that you're all aware of it. So just an introduction, Creative Spark is a program by the British Council which runs across 7 countries. Newcastle University is partnering with the Centre for Analysis of Economic Reforms and Communications in Baku. And we've been running this program for the past years, and we hope it's going to continue for a couple more. There are 8 webinars of this series. This is number 6. You can access all webinars that you have maybe missed on our website, and we have recorded them for them and you can watch them. Please be aware that this session is being recorded and we're going to put it on a public facing website. So if you would not like to have your face online, feel welcome to switch off your camera. That's totally okay. You also agree by staying online that we can use the video and the photos, screenshots, for example, in the British Council Creative Spark programs, marketing and outreach. Please mute your microphones throughout the session while Paul and Fiona present. But once we go into Q&A afterwards, it would be lovely if you could unmute yourself and run your video when you have a question. And finally, after the webinar, I will send out a quick, tiny, short evaluation form. And I would really appreciate if you can give us your comments so that we can improve this experience for you. Without further ado, so today's webinar will be about the Createathon, which is a program that has been brought online by Fiona and Paul as part of Creative Spark. And it's really a workshop program where students go through business challenges and they experience entrepreneurship, not just learn the theory. So Fiona and Paul will talk a little bit about the program and how they developed the toolkit and how you can use it in the classroom as well. Just for introduction, Paul is a lecturer here at Newcastle University Business School in Innovation and Entrepreneurship, and he has very extensive experience working on creative economies, both in Azerbaijan, where he's been with Creative Spark, but also here, I'm based in Nairobi, and he's been working here in East Africa as well. And Fiona, we've all met her previously. She was so kind to give us a previous webinar. She is senior lecturer at Newcastle Business School, and she's also been to Azerbaijan a couple of times to host this Createathon or workshops for students. So without further ado, Fiona and Paul, I'm looking forward to your presentation. I unshare and you can go ahead.
Just while Fiona's setting up the presentation, hello to everyone who does know me and doesn't know me. As we're such a small group, can I be cheeky and ask Vicky, Melanie, and you're going to have to help me pronounce your name?
You did. Sorry, I will change the first name as first.
Yudi, is that right? Can I ask the 3 of you just to quickly let us know kind of where you are and what you do? Vicky, could you?
Yeah, sorry, I always struggle to find the unmute button in time. I'm Vicky. I'm a postgrad student. I'm doing a master's in international relations, but I'm currently a communications assistant intern for NISA. So I help run like the social media and promote things.
Where are you studying?
Newcastle.
Okay, in our school.
Yeah, international relations, the politics school.
Right. Ah, right. Okay. Thanks, Vicky. Melanie?
I'm the business development manager for the National Innovation Centre for Rural Enterprise. So work with Vicky. So really my interest here is a lot of the work that NICE is doing. We're looking at pulling toolkits together for businesses. So we're pulling one on net zero together at the minute and one on internationalization of businesses. So it was just really interesting to see what you've been doing and to see if there's any best practice we can share from that.
Sure. Thanks, Melanie. Judy?
I'm from Hungary. I'm working at the Faculty of Business and Economics as an associate professor and a coach. I came through this program through Lucy Head because we have close connection with Team Academy. This is about team entrepreneurship, and my main interest is how to develop entrepreneurial competencies for students, which is for me, if I take the EntraComp, is like active citizenship.
Great, thank you, Judy. Sorry, Fiona, I've already spent 2 minutes going around the room. It just seemed nicer to, so it was a bit more intimate that we kind of all knew each other. So I'll get on with things. So I'm going to kind of introduce the first bit of this, the first 7 or 8 slides, where I'll tell you something about what it is we're doing and where we've done it over the last few years. And then Fiona will kind of put it more in the context of the broader Educators Toolkit that we're developing as part of this Spark program for educators to benefit from in their own contexts. So let's get cracking, Fiona, please. So what is it? The kind of well-worn notion of the hackathon that's been very popular in lots of contexts in the last probably 10, 15 years. Of course, originally that was a kind of software development type activity where lots of people with big brains would get together over a day and kind of solve a solution. That indeed is the kind of inspiration for what we're calling a Createathon. You know, it's a kind of time compressed activity. It's kind of high pressured because it's time compressed. And often you have a kind of diverse team. In this case, it's mainly students working alongside businesses, but often those students have a kind of diverse background. And we think that diversity is a kind of a useful element of it, but not necessary for it to work. And it's kind of oriented towards some sort of solution coming out at the end of that short time period. So that's the kind of hackathon relationship. So it brings together kind of 3 communities, if you like. One is people like me and Fiona, who are academics, often don't have to be full-time kind of post-holding academics, but those who are around education in the spaces of entrepreneurship, innovation, and so on. And in the events that we've run that I'll be mentioning in the next 5 minutes, it's been two or three academic staff for the kind of size of the event that we've run. You then have students, and I'm trying to remember the kind of precise numbers, but something around 20, 25 students we've had in the events that we've run. And that's kind of in relationship to the number of businesses, which I suppose is the crucial sort of number that determines how many students are needed. And we found that around 6, 7, 8 businesses is kind of enough and about the right sort of number to generate kind of energy, promote sort of networking among businesses. And then we would tend to have 2 or 3 students per business. So 20-ish students, 7-ish businesses, and a couple of academic staff who I think Fiona's going to mention later, the kind of the right kind of staff that we think fits in this sort of space. And you know, so in terms of the kind of structure of the Createathon, it's tended in the early days to be 2 separate days. So often something like a Monday of a week and a Friday of a week when we have the all-day workshops, and then in between times students are doing kind of refining and extra work in order to present on the final day to the businesses. We have also delivered it in a more compressed version where we've had 2 half days with a few days kind of in between. But that's probably adaptable and maybe something that we wanted to sort of chew over at some point later on. And what happens is that the 2 or 3 students are put together with the business that they'll be working with during the workshops early on the first day. And there's a series of kind of structured activities promoting creativity and business analysis that they work through in order to arrive at some kind of endpoint, some sort of solution for the business. And we've done it a few times since 2017, mainly in person. but once virtually like this, which I'll come to. Fiona? So the first time we did this was with a couple of colleagues at the business school, Mo and Anna Maria. And there's some pictures of when we could actually meet in person and shake hands and share a cup of tea and do things like that that seem quite foreign to us now. So that happened in our business school in Newcastle, which some of you will know and some of you won't. So it's an 8-story business school, and on the top floor we have a kind of big kind of room that we use for what do we do? Exhibitions and events. It's an event space, and that's the picture on the left of the screen. You see, I haven't been there for so long, I've forgotten how to even talk about physical spaces. So that's me at the front there, and that's one of our kind of plenary sessions. I think that is when, at the end of the second day, the second workshop, all of the teams come together in that space, and the students from each team present to the businesses in a visual form called a pechakucha that kind of represents what it is that they found out about the business and the sort of key messages they want to give them at the end of their research and thinking. And the other 2 pictures are of our students. Oh, hang on a sec. Sorry, Fiona. The other 2 pictures are of 2 of the student teams working in kind of breakout rooms, real breakout rooms, not virtual ones, where kind of that they would be based with their business in each of those, developing ideas and working through those analytical tools with the businesses. So I want to say anything else about that? Yeah, just something about the students. So the students you can see there in those pictures, Fiona and I at the time knew quite well because we taught them. They were on 2 of our master's programs, one Innovation, Creativity, Entrepreneurship, the other one Arts, Business and Creativity. And at the time that we kind of first designed the Createathon, we had in mind that the sorts of students that would take part would be those that had had some kind of formal input in terms of entrepreneurship, creativity, and so on. We've actually run them since with students without any of that kind of background. And maybe we'll kind of come on to talk about this, the necessity of the kind of background and discipline of the student to make these sorts of things work. But in this case, in the first instance, Fiona and I had taught these innovation and creativity students in Newcastle on master's programs. Fiona, thank you. So this is fast forwarding a year to when Fiona and I were lucky enough to go out to Baku to meet our partners out there. And we did our first Azerbaijani Createathon. In the event, it actually, so it was based at the same offices that Enterprise Azerbaijan is in Baku. And we had 2 businesses that we were working with that day. I'm actually trying to remember, Fiona, but I don't think we did 2 full days. I think we compressed it into 1 day, didn't we? Or was it 1 and a kind of half day the next day, something like that?
It was 1 day and then half a day the next, or it might have, yeah, it was one full day and then half a day the next day.
So slightly compressed version of what we've done in Newcastle a couple of times, but following the same kind of format. It was scaled down to an extent because we only had 2 businesses in this case and about 10 students that were divided among the 2 businesses. So you can see one of the business owners there at the back in the white shirt, leaning over. He's a producer of honey in Baku, and at the other end of the table, you can't see, the other business produced some very tasty apple crisps that we were lucky enough to try. I think I had about 10 bags of those. And they were really kind of great businesses. Of course, this is the first time that we tried this in a sort of non-UK context. And we might get into some of the kind of differences between how the businesses and students interacted and so on at some point later. Fiona may cover that. But on the whole, it was a great success given the kind of constraints that we were working under. And I think the students and businesses got a lot out of the event. And then finally, Fiona, the next slide we've got a screenshot of our first ever, our premiere virtual Createathon that happened back in April. And you can see some of the people who took part there. So we did this with Wendy Parvin, who some of you know. On my screen, she's the top left box, as Wendy, Fiona, and then me in the same room. But in that picture, I've got a bike in the background. Thankfully, I fixed the puncture now, so that's gone. And it was really fun. I mean, for me, the kind of overriding sort of difference was the absence of what was in the first picture, in the Newcastle picture, when in the kind of big plenary room, where apart from formal presentations and so on, you know, we'd be able to do a lot of kind of informal networking over coffee, where businesses would talk to businesses, students would talk to businesses, we would talk to everyone, and that kind of trust building that goes on in those sorts of informal breaks and so on, you know, is more or less missing in the virtual setting. But I think Fiona and I were struck at how well it went, how much kind of goodwill all participants brought to the event to make it a real success. So in this case, we had 7, I think, regional businesses from the creative sectors. We had again about 20 students, some of whom you can see on the screens there, and they were either currently studying in Newcastle, some of our business school programs, or they were graduates of those programs, and they kind of came together to take part in this, or they were in Azerbaijan studying similar business school type programs out there. But physically, we had students on the days that this took part dispersed all over the world. So even though they were kind of studying in the UK or Azerbaijan, they could have been based anywhere. And that kind of covers that one, I think. So just briefly, 2 final slides from me. The kind of a brief list of the sort of why take part. First for the students and then for the businesses themselves. So for the students, what do they get out of it? Any educator knows that kind of top point about gaining experience of working with real live businesses on real kind of problems is something that there is more and more appetite for, and there's more and more kind of responsibility or obligation for the likes of us to deliver to students. And this is a really nice kind of time limited, quite intense way of responding to that call for real live interaction and engagement with businesses. For those students who have a particular kind of interest in entrepreneurship and what it's like to start a business and try to develop, and the sort of ups and downs that entrepreneurs go through, it's a great way of them having kind of focused time with business owners, whether that's virtual or in person, better in person, to kind of sense the sort of behind the scenes sort of experience of the entrepreneur. And that's obviously invaluable, particularly for those students who want to go on to be part of a small business or start one up themselves. Of course, it's a chance to put all of that kind of sort of theoretical, conceptual stuff that Fiona and I have been putting into their heads month after month to kind of test that out in a real world setting. How can they articulate some of that kind of theoretical knowledge in a more kind of practice-based setting? So it's really helpful in making that kind of bridge. Students on our programs tend to have quite a lot of experience of working in teams, but that's not the case in all programs across all countries. So this kind of experience definitely offers that kind of intense team working experience. In our case, in the UK, it was very cross-cultural because that's just the makeup of the students that we have on our programs. In the case of when we went to Azerbaijan, that was probably less so, even though there were students from surrounding countries who were studying in Baku that kind of reflected that kind of diversity. And of course, they're kind of coming across the sorts of techniques that kind of business consultants, for example, might use, or creative consultants that may be practically useful to them in the future. And probably that last point is something that I wouldn't say surprised Fiona and I, but it keeps striking me certainly when we're going through these processes. And while the students often find at the beginning, they might be a bit apprehensive. What am I in for? What's going to be expected of me? I'm working with a real business. It's important that what I kind of say and research and how I say it in terms of reflecting the values of the business and so on is important. More often than not, what students come up with through this process is incredible. I can't remember having done a Createathon where I haven't stood there at the end thinking, wow, these students have stepped up in a way that probably they didn't think they could do, but kind of being gently forced to do so within the context of this sort of activity can bring out in them something which they will really benefit from as they go forward. And the final slide for me. So for the businesses, it's things like being exposed and working closely with the sorts of people that they just don't come across day to day. They don't come across often young graduates, particularly if it is a kind of very diverse group of students from different cultures. The opportunity to kind of tap into the perspectives of students who are diverse, who are often digital natives, and who are kind of tuned in often to the sort of global trends and the kind of sense of where the world's going. I mean, if it was today we were doing it, these are students who are more conscious, for example, of environmental causes, of diversity. And these businesses, some of whom may have business owners who are old, like me, who are kind of less kind of aware of what those big issues mean in the context of the practice of their business. And what they've got in front of them is, young, digitally enabled people with that kind of awareness who can bring that to the particular business problem. Ideally, the event leads to some real value, real kind of development for the business. Doesn't always happen, but it often does. And at the very least, what this activity does for the business, I think, is it raises certain questions for them that they can take away and that is useful for them to reflect on, even if it doesn't end up in a prototype for a new product. It could be that it's a kind of still a useful kind of reflective process. And it's one that forces, again, the business in a gentle way to have to articulate their value, to kind of justify the journey they've been on. And that process can put the businesses in quite a kind of vulnerable situation in some ways. But often we find that because of the kind of trust that's built around them, it's one that they benefit from. And it leads to that next point about the kind of confidence that businesses often go away from this kind of activity with, and a kind of sense of validation that I am a good business owner, and I have got a future in terms of my business, and so on. That's a very kind of universal point that Fiona and I have picked up on, not only in the Createathon, but other kind of business support engagement that we've done. But it's still an important one. And of course, it's an opportunity for the business owner to be with the likes of us, who have our own kinds of connections, again, that wouldn't be typical for businesses to come across day to day, as well as the students, and of course, each other, that kind of business to business networking, which isn't the kind of primary outcome for this kind of activity, but it's definitely a positive spin-off from bringing businesses together in this kind of context. I think that's me done there, Fiona.
Thanks, Paul. So I will unmute myself and come on to the actual toolkit. And also, I'm really, really pleased to say we've got Anna on this webinar, and Anna has been bringing the toolkit to life in terms of the website. Now, the website is still very much a work in progress, but it's also Anna who's been putting all of these webinars up onto the website. So a big thanks to her, and it's nice to see Vicky as an intern as well. I think this is I love working with students and businesses, and I suppose, you know, in both those scenarios you're actually working with the university as in its sort of don't like to describe as a university as a business, but in its sort of inner workings rather than just studying here. So long and short of it was that Paul and I loved running these Createathons, but we were sort of challenged to try and put together trying to condense all that we knew about running these events into some form of toolkit or guide, so that the Createathon could be run by educators in Azerbaijan, elsewhere in the Creative Spark network, or anywhere. And the idea is this will be a walkthrough guide to producing an event like this, because it is quite a big production. So everything you need from deciding to go ahead right through to the outcomes that Paul mentioned, because you do need to have the notion that there will be outcomes both for the businesses but also for the students, so that it is beneficial. I would also say there are benefits for the educators in terms of running these events, because again we gain new connections, and as Paul said, it's always just a joy to see the success of bringing together different individuals who wouldn't necessarily otherwise get to meet. So the Createathon Toolkit will be available on our Creative Spark website. You can see here that we've got sort of different sessions or different sections, thanks to Anna, on preparing the Createathon, the day 1 sessions, day 2 sessions, and the Createathon resources. So here you can see all of the different day 1 sessions. Because as Paul said, despite the fact that you can run it over different times, we do have a particular set of exercises that we use. Again, they will be ones that you can adapt to your own needs. The intention for the toolkit, and I think this is really important for any kind of toolkit. One thing is you need the rationale for each component. So we are setting out, you know, why we would do a day 1 session, why we would do a creative warm-up exercise. That's around, again, words that Paul's used, it's around building trust with the group, making sure that people are aware that there's kind of no such thing as a daft suggestion, that you're learning to sort of challenge, but challenge in a good way. So that I think can be quite important, particularly when you're working in different contexts. And this is something that we need to learn more about in terms of, you know, it was a very different experience for us running it in Azerbaijan than it was in the UK. And I think anybody running this in a different country would need to contextualize it to their own country and the way that businesses interact with universities and so on. So I do think it's important that you have the rationale for each component, but that equally it might differ in different countries. We want to give people downloadable and editable templates. Again, they have to be editable because you might not want to do precisely these exercises, but I think it's really important to have those templates. And then there are certain issues where we've specifically looked to develop how-to guides. Paul mentioned the Petch Kutcher presentations when everybody was in that event space on the 8th floor of the business school. We did those in Azerbaijan, we did those virtually, but a Petch Kutcher is many of you will have used it, but it's a very particular type of presentation, very effective type of presentation. But if students haven't done it before, we want to give them sort of resources so that they know exactly how it can be. And I think that's particularly important if you're doing things virtually, because when you're doing it in person, I think when we were in Azerbaijan, the businesses had gone home at the end of the day. We'd had a lovely day. We'd gone out for lunch. It was all really nice. And we just had a little time with the students saying, right, this is a Pecha Kucha. Paul was able to bring up some examples and things. If you don't have, I think you tend to be more limited in time when you're doing things virtually. So it's really important to have those resources available. But I think that will, I think we've all learned that some things that we do online, we will almost, it would enhance what we do face to face, if you understand what I mean. So I think, if I was ever running or plan to run a face to face workshop like this again, I would still want to give the students those how-to guides sort of virtually. So that's the idea for what the Createathon toolkit will contain. So just some exercises. So this one's one that we adapt from Nesta's creative enterprise toolkit. The students would really work through with the business owner the business owner's personal values, because we think that this is an important part of creative businesses, particularly, that they tend to reflect their owners' values. I think it would also be true, particularly for social enterprise businesses, or those ones that have got a real environmental focus, coming back to Melanie's idea of the sort of encouraging net zero and so on. So this values exercise is one that's done. Another one, we give them a creative enterprise canvas. This is adapted from, you can see here, adapted from Strategizer. So the original business model canvas. This one was actually developed by colleagues in the careers service previously, and the wording is probably far too small to see, but the wording is more tailored to creative businesses. But we've also got on the toolkit a standard business model canvas as well. Coming back to, what are the intended sort of outcomes for the businesses, and for, well, particularly, for the businesses, because we'll talk about, how you try and engage them, or how we've tried to engage them. One of the things that we say to them that they will get is they'll get the completed exercises from day one. So they'll get a values exercise, they'll get the canvas. They'll also get an action card, which will give the students recommendations. So one of the things we encourage the students to do is to come up with recommendations that they can make they can suggest to the business, and the next steps that the business would need to take. And then, as we mentioned, they also get the Pecha Kucha. And as Paul says, we're always blown away with the standard of the Pecha Kuchas, and generally the engagement from the students. So one of the other things, the first thing, or the thing I want to cover in the next slides, is Paul talked briefly about how do you find the right students, how do you find the right companies. So we do think there's quite a lot of things to think about before you even consider doing one of these exercises. And I would say that it's not just for creative businesses, but this is the context that we've used it in. So yeah, it takes a lot. It takes a lot of time to do this, and you probably do need to assemble more resources and more time than we usually do. So you need the right staff. Your facilitators, need to be, I've got here, you know, you need to be experienced and flexible and ability to think on your feet. Probably if we started planning a little bit earlier, we might not need to do so much thinking on your feet, but actually it builds that sort of buzz and the excitement. I do think you need to be or the staff who are facilitating need to be really sensitive to the needs of both the businesses and the students, because the engagement of both is absolutely vital. We need to recruit students, and again, we've done various different ways of that. So as Paul said, in the very early days, we knew the students very well. When we were doing it in Baku, we were reliant on Enterprise Azerbaijan and our partners to recruit the students. And again, we ended up with a really good mix of students. And this time, colleagues, I don't know if Katira is on the call, but colleagues in Azerbaijan supported us in contacting their students. We recruited recent graduates, as well as students really from across the university. So whether it was due to the timing of the programme, I don't know, but we got very few of our own students. So really we didn't know, we hardly knew any of these students. But again, I think just the whole setting enabled us to build the trust quite quickly. Other staff resources, I would say you do need support on sort of marketing, to publicise the event, to recruit businesses. On the whole, we recruited the businesses from our own networks. You do need the right businesses, so they do need to be open to fresh ideas. Mentioned this briefly, there may be cultural differences in different countries as to how open businesses are to taking advice from students. Now, I'm not sure whether that's cultural. It might almost be, it's also sort of maybe different age differentials, and also just different personalities. So you really need businesses who are going to be willing to engage with the students and potentially take on board their ideas. They also need to be prepared to scope a creative enterprise challenge. So this doesn't need to be anything fixed, but they do need to have an idea of what they would like the students to be able to work on, because this is quite a focused time. So that's another thing, that they need to spend time with a facilitator or somebody else really talking about their business, so that the facilitators have some idea of the business before they come in. Some issues, just more minor issues, but we do have to be aware of commercial confidentiality. We've never gone as far as signing non-disclosure agreements at this stage, but I've always said to the businesses, don't share anything that you don't want to be, that you don't want to share. It's quite logical, but also when the students have done the Pecha we always give them time to run through the Pecha with the business before they present it, just in case there's anything that's been said there that they wouldn't want to come out in a more open space. Again, it's just generally, I think, for the students, it is managing expectations and ensuring that they're going to be engaged. I think making sure the language ability matches the language in which the exercise will be conducted, and really sort of ensuring that they know that there will be some work in between the sessions. As Paul said, ideally you run it with a few days in between. So the one that we ran virtually, the first session was the Monday afternoon, the final session was the Friday morning. And, again, ideally you would have people who had some experience of entrepreneurship, innovation or creativity teaching, but again, that will depend on, what the curriculum is, what the higher education curriculum is in different countries where those subjects might not be so openly taught. And I think the most important thing as sort of for the facilitators, is this maintaining this positive, you know, that everybody's presence is really valuable. Structure, obviously very different online. I know that Paul's yearning to get back into person with drinks at the end, and you know, it is good. And you know, for that, you need to have a lot of space. So we had to take over, you know, the whole of the 8th floor of our building, plus when you've got, you know, you need a breakout room for each group of students. So, you know, there's quite a lot of space required if you're doing it in person. And I'll come on to some of the virtual considerations in the next slide. And again, this thing, you know, the outcomes, said that in terms of the business outcomes, they need to feel they've got something out of it. And the feedback that we had, feedback we've always had, has been that they have got something out of it. I think you need to think about what your students are going to get out of it. Very first one we offered a cash prize for the best petriculture. I don't think we'd be allowed to do that now, just in terms of our financial regulations. But the Wendy, who was the other person who helped us facilitate the virtual one, you know, she wasn't at all keen on that idea. Again, it would be difficult if you're doing it virtually. But we also note that in different countries, different sort of recognition is really important. So we always knew that for Azerbaijan, the sort of a certificate of attendance would be very important. And we've also talked about, you know, LinkedIn recommendations and things like that. So the students will definitely get a learning out of it, but it's how you actually recognise maybe that contribution in a more tangible way. I won't say physical way. Now, virtual considerations, you need to select your digital platform and ensure that you have sufficient bandwidth. I beautifully set this up on Teams, thinking that was great. Paul said, wouldn't we be better on Zoom? No, it's fine. I like Teams. Teams will give them working space and they'll be able to store files securely and everything. Teams was an absolute disaster in this case. People had difficulty accessing it. It did seem to take more bandwidth. So I think you just need to select and test your digital platform quite carefully. Similarly with the digital tools. So we used, and Anna is further developing, Miro boards. Some of the businesses didn't find that great, though the students loved them. But again, from Azerbaijan, certain people needed to access them via a VPN. So I think I tried to encourage people to test that access to Miro. So I set up a test board. I gave them a little video and everything, but I think I should have checked more that they had all accessed that Miro board. That would be a lesson for me. Obviously, you're accounting for working across time zones when it's applicable. And I think you need to think, and maybe we need to do more thinking about how you support the independent group working between the workshops, because you're expecting them to do quite a lot of work, the students to do quite a lot of work in between the workshops. They may want to contact the businesses. I think the contact with the businesses, we very much just left to the individual businesses and the students. But we offered drop-in Zoom sessions, and probably 2 or 3 of the students sort of took that up. So I do think you need to think, or we need to think more maybe about that. So just final slide, because I know we're running a little bit later in terms of discussions, and we would like the discussion. So similar, Paul raised, or Paul got you to sort of introduce your sort of the context and so on. So we were just wondering whether you have run similar enterprise events. If not, would you feel how confident would you feel running this type of event, and what kind of resources have you seen developed or would you find useful in terms of developing any toolkits, so that we can learn from your experiences as well. So I shall go on to the final slide saying thank you. That's our contact details, and I shall end that presentation.
Lovely, thank you, Paul and Fiona. So we open up the floor for questions. And the first one was from Nazreen. So she seemed to have left, but we can answer her question anyway, and then she can have it in a video. So right now, a lot of the fields on the website are still empty. When will it be filled and by whom?
Well, as I said, I think Anna's still on the, Anna's still here. So Anna is just been fantastic. I shall just make her blush on video. She's just an amazing support for us. Wendy is working with Paul and myself to sort of get that knowledge out of our head and into various guides, and the idea is that Wendy will have that to as a timeline for the 8th of July, but then that will take editing time and time for us to be able to put them sort of professionally up onto the website. But certainly we are, fingers crossed, at least having a sort of beta version of the toolkit by end of July.
Okay, great. Any other questions? Or also maybe if you have an experience that you can share, anything.
I just wanted to comment and say it sounds like
happy to join.
The most amazing thing, because I've done very similar but with businesses, so kind of action learning sets. I'm not academic at all, so my background is as a business advisor for 25 years, an export advisor. So we set up tourism networks in Northeast region, and then went on to kind of toolkit them probably 15 years ago, no, 13 years ago now, and then set them up in Poland and Iceland and Norway, simply because they match the kind of rural demographics. So, but never having brought in students, I can see that added dynamic would just bring that extra level to it. Do you know what I mean? So it's really great to get businesses working together. And I'm sure you're aware that LEP at the minute are delivering a number of peer networks. So they've got 26 peer networks they're delivering, and we're hoping to run some through NICER, some additional ones, but with micros, because that project is 5 employees and more. And I think there's a dynamic there that really we could do with looking at from a micro business, because if you're in a business with 5 employees, you've got 4 other people to talk to. Whereas if you're on your own, having been there and being self-employed, it's a bit lonely sometimes. But it's just, I was really fascinated to see when you add in the dynamic of students that, you know, it obviously takes it to a different level, and how that would work really, and how potentially we could look at bringing that into the work we're doing with the LEP at the minute.
It was really interesting, Melanie, because when you first said that you were looking at toolkits for businesses, and I was thinking, oh, this isn't really going to be really appropriate for Melanie. Then I was thinking, actually, I think it could work really well with the students as well, because again, you've got so many students are very interested in sustainability and, you know, net zero and all of that kind of thing. So particularly on that kind of challenge, that could work really well. And you know, Paul's mentioned that we do other business development, or we do other work with micro businesses. And again, yeah, we run a program called Captured, that brings together micro businesses with larger organizations. So again, it's all this theme about bringing people together who would not normally meet. And we had looked at the peer networks for the LEP, but we were thinking that actually, like you say, that the need to have more than 5 employees it's a very different type of business then. So yeah, these, I would say, Paul, have we ever worked with a non-micro business on the Createathon?
Can't remember.
Oh, there might have been non-micro in Azerbaijan. But other than that, they've tended to be micros or collections of freelancers.
Yeah.
And often, Melanie, it's that one of the reasons is the point you mentioned about it being lonely.
Yeah, of course.
You don't often get the kind of feedback and what we've termed validation from other businesses and students and people like me and Fiona and you, for the business owner to feel, blimey, you know, I've been doing this for 7 years. I've kind of hit a bit of a trough. I'm not too sure what to do.
Yeah.
And the energy that you can build during these kind of time intensive exercises is really, it's great for them as a kind of filler to keep going. And I mean, we have had businesses, Fiona, who've sort of said, coming on this has given me the energy to now go forward for another few years rather than peter out.
Definitely. I mean, to be honest, we used to, in my business, we used to run weekend workshops, either for startups or, and it was a very similar sort of, you know, intense, you take them away from their business, they come with a vision of what they want to get out of the end of it. And then it is a lot about peer support and, you know, and it's, I took part in something in Iceland called the Mirror Program, and it was really interesting, and it was, you know, very in depth, and it was people sharing every bit of their business. So you got into some very quite interesting stuff in there and some financials, and you were sharing that detail, the level of trust within that group, because it was a 12-month program that you went to each business. I think there was 8 businesses, so you spent a couple of days in each business, but you literally, there were hotels, so you literally went and camped there for like 48 hours, and that was you were their consultants. So it worked really interestingly. But I think businesses, if you get the right mix of businesses, the trust that they build is fabulous, and that keeps going. And there's that ripple effect, isn't there, after the event and after your Createathon, that energy keeps going, which is fab.
Often we need to tap into that. Sorry, Fiona. We find we kind of tap into that ripple effect you're talking about in order to do the next Createathon or the next similar kind of program, or, you know, they'll tell us about somebody else in their network who could benefit and so on. Yeah.
Can I just ask a question? So the businesses
sorry, Melanie, can I just go to Judith, because she had a question as well, and then we can come back to you. Okay.
Thank you very much. First of all, thank you for presenting your work. It was very interesting. I have a kind of interest in this network and stakeholder relation building. I have a lot of questions, but maybe one, because you mentioned that students can be 2 or 3, and I was thinking, is it okay if it's only 2? Because I prefer 3. So if they just 2 in the team, do you have any experience regarding the difference between the number of students in a team?
Judith, as usual, that's, I'll just check I'm not muted. That's a really good question, because when we very, very first did this, we found that I think we had too few students, and, you know, if you get one who's not engaged, or one, you know, life happens, so if you get one who drops out. So I would say, and Paul may disagree, I think ideally you would probably want maybe 3 or 4 students with the basis that you, at an absolute minimum, you would have 2 students sort of actively participating. In Azerbaijan, we probably ended up with more students than we needed. So if you've got too many, particularly virtually, they can't really work together, because if you think, if you're in a physical room and you've got 6 students, so they don't, the business isn't there with them all the time. If you've got 6 students, you know, one of them can maybe work on one bit of market research, or one group 3 can work on this bit and 3 can work on that bit. But when you're all in one breakout room, it's quite difficult. So I don't know if Paul wants to add anything to that, but I would say 3 to 4 is probably your ideal.
Yeah, I definitely agree with the having too many, and 5 is probably too many. You'll always find that 1, possibly 2 will take the lead, And that's okay, you know, groups kind of naturally form around those who are more vocal. But I think we found in Azerbaijan, we had one or two who were quite obviously disengaged. At one point, I think one was sleeping at the desk. And I think that's partly a product of there being enough students in that group to kind of take on the work. And so it's easy, you know, as happens in student groups all the time, you know, not time limited, but bigger projects. So definitely too many. The 2 or 3, yeah, I suppose it depends on the students. And I think this is where the recruitment and the expectation setting that Fiona talked about is so important with those students. You need at least one who you think is a kind of banker, somebody who you know they will deliver. And then maybe 1 or 2 with them to help them deliver is good enough. But if you've got less confident, less experienced, those without either the disciplinary background or language, just in our case English, because we were very international, to step up and deliver, then that can be difficult, even if you had 4 of them. So it's a bit of a mixed answer I'm giving you, Judy.
And I just want to say, I know that we're very much coming to the end, but and I know Nazrin's had to leave the call, but I agree entirely with Paul on that need for sort of a banker, a sort of not in terms of discipline, but you know, somebody who you know will be able to make things work. But also Nazrin's point about she thinks this in the chat, she thinks this kind of program and events make the students engage more in the sort of ecosystem, and I think that's one of the things that we certainly find in the Northeast, and it's interesting that Nazrin is pointing that out for Azerbaijan as well, because I think Nazrin's from Azerbaijan, and certainly that was one of the things that British Council Azerbaijan wanted us to do, was to think of activities that could bring the ecosystem, the business schools, the universities and students together. So thank you.
Thank you very much.
Lovely.
Do they create the team for their own, or you put them in team?
We definitely put them into teams. Again, I think that was a question that I was asked on a previous webinar. Yes, for this we do feel that we have to put them into teams, because again, just to get the mix of students, and as Paul says, that you will know that you know, particularly when you don't know the students well, you really need to try and identify one person who will be able to lead the group if others don't step forward. I'm not saying that the others won't, but it just gives you a little bit of confidence.
Okay, thank you for your question, Judith, and thanks Fiona and Paul for your presentation. It's been a real pleasure, really insightful, and we're looking forward to having the Toolkit ready in beta version in July, you said, right? So
end of July.
End of July.
I'm giving myself as much time as possible.
All right, fair enough. So just as a note for next time, we have another webinar coming up on Thursday. It will be Dr. Lucy Hatt, who talks about thresholds concept in entrepreneurship and enterprise education. So what are some of the concepts that students should learn or could learn to progress in their thinking? So it will be same time on Thursday. Again, I will send out a quick survey in the end. Do kindly fill it out. And if you have any more questions to Paul and Fiona, do reach out to us, email me, and I can forward it to Paul or Fiona. And also their email was in the PPT, so I'm sure they're happy if you reach out by yourself. So I'm looking forward to seeing you again in the next webinar. Thank you for attending today. And thanks to Paul and Fiona again. Have a good day. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.